Chapter 34. Eddie Gage. A New Jersey bank robber nicknamed Lumpy, who had a history of attacking guards, woke up one morning and decided to kill Eddie Gage. Lumpy had had a tough week. He had been fired from his job in the kitchen for arguing with his boss. A guard had assigned him extra work around the cell house as punishment for not keeping his cell clean, and his mother had died, and Gage had denied his request to attend her funeral. The Bureau sometimes allowed inmates to attend funerals if their families paid the cost of having guards accompanying them. Lumpy would later recall that when he got out of his bunk, he had simply said to himself, "Fuck this, I don't care anymore, I'm going to kill Gage." When Lumpy didn't show up for work at his new prison job that morning, his boss notified the lieutenant's office at 9:35. Lieutenant Tracy Johns spotted Lumpy sitting in the bleachers in the prison yard with two other inmates. "Need to talk to you in the lieutenant's office," said Johns as he approached the trio. "I ain't going to work," Lumpy replied. "Come on," Johns ordered. "I got a knife," Lumpy blurted. "I'm going to kill Gage." Johns froze. "I didn't know exactly what he had in mind," Johns recalled later. "But if he had a knife and his buddies were backing him, I figured I was in trouble." As Johns stood silent, Lumpy suddenly covered his face with his hands and began to sob. "He just broke down right there," Johns recalled. He frisked Lumpy and found nothing. During questioning, Lumpy said he had gotten a knife that morning and had waited for an hour for Gage to arrive at his office in the cell house. Gage never came, so Lumpy got rid of the knife and went into the yard to think. It turned out that Gage had been delayed at home. "I don't mean to belittle this," he said when he told Lumpy he had been stalking him, "but in this business, this sort of thing happens, and you can't worry about it, or you'd never come to work." Better than most, Gage knew death. As a soldier in Vietnam, Gage had killed for the first time when he was 18. By the time he ended his combat tour 2 years later, he had received 4 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and had stopped counting the number of enemies he had killed. His specialty was setting up ambushes. "I slept with the first one I killed for a long time," he recalled. "Knowing that I had killed another human being bothered me. But although I hate to admit it, killing is no different from anything else." During a particularly fierce firefight in December 1968 in the Ashau Valley, all but 2 of Gage's men were killed. They were badly outnumbered, so Gage ordered both men to retreat while he, in what the Army later described as an extraordinary act of valor, fired an M60 machine gun at the enemy troops until all his ammunition was spent. Then he fired all the rounds in his M16. Only after that did Gage retreat. "I didn't want to die. I wasn't one of those guys who felt he was born to fight and die in Vietnam." I remember thinking, "God damn, Gage, what the hell are you doing? You aren't going to die. They're going to kill you. Why don't you fall back with those other 2 guys?" And I honestly don't know why I stayed. I really didn't. I just felt it was something I had to do. I managed to elude the attacking enemy troops and was later rescued by a helicopter. Gage had never turned away from a fight, nor did he understand men who shrank from blood. The son of a prison guard at the federal penitentiary in Lompoc, California, Gage had been a self-described hellraiser as a teenager. He quit school at age 16 to work. 2 years later, he married Pistol, who was 2 weeks shy of her 15th birthday. They were poor. She hoed weeds with migrant workers to help support them. He was drafted less than a month after their wedding. The Army made Gage a drill sergeant when his tour in Vietnam ended, but Gage didn't re-enlist. A friend gave him a job working in a bar. "I didn't have any skills," he recalled. "I was going nowhere and sure to become an alcoholic." When the Bureau hired him in 1970 as a guard at Lompoc, where his father still worked, he and Pistol were elated. "We felt rich," remembered Pistol. "Gage was paid $6,200 per year. I felt very grateful to the Bureau," she added. On his first day at work, a beefy inmate walked up to the much shorter and bone-thin Gage and said, "I hear you're Gage's kid." "On the best day in your life, you couldn't whoop me," replied Gage. "I never said I could. But just before you get me whipped, you're going to wonder if you'll get it done. Now you want to fight or talk?" The inmate walked away. In the early 1970s, the Bureau didn't have specially trained and outfitted SWORD teams. Instead, they operated riot squads made up of volunteers who did whatever was necessary to stop an inmate from hurting other inmates or staff. Gage became the first man, which meant that when a cell door was open, he was the first to scramble inside and confront an inmate. He enjoyed it. Gage earned the rank of senior lieutenant in only 5 years, an amazing feat at the time. He was one of the Bureau's most promising young officers, and he was proven to be especially good at investigating prison murders. From Lompoc, Gage was sent to the penitentiary in Atlanta, and on December 4th, 1979, he solved one of the most gruesome murders in the prison's history. A 22-year-old dietitian who joined the Bureau directly from college and had only worked at the prison for a few weeks was found dead in the library at the prison hospital. Gage discovered a package of Pall Mall cigarettes lying under her skirt, which had been jerked around her ankles. The pack had apparently fallen out of an inmate's pocket while he was raping her. Gage also found a coffee cup on a shelf near the door. Armed with those two clues, Gage checked the sheet that inmates were required to sign when they first came into the hospital. One of the patients listed on it was Robert E. Lee Hogan Jr., a convicted rapist. The name Hogan sounded familiar to Gage, and when he looked at the coffee cup, he remembered why. The letter H was scratched on the bottom. Gage went immediately to Hogan's cell and found a freshly opened carton of Pall Mall cigarettes next to the bunk. Gage called the FBI, and when agents interviewed Hogan, he admitted that he had raped and murdered the woman. Over the coming years, friends and neighbors would ask Gage if he ever felt sorry for the inmates he guarded. People unfamiliar with prisons frequently talked sympathetically about convicts, as if they really didn't deserve to be locked up. Whenever this happened, Gage would remember the afternoon he spent with two FBI agents listening to Hogan confess. Gage's investigation showed that Hogan had actually gone to the hospital to kill a psychiatrist who had been treating him, but she had gone to lunch, so Hogan walked the halls aimlessly until he came upon the dietitian. In a voice that was chilling because it was so calm, Hogan described what had happened. I just took the knife out of my pants and I held it there for a second, and she was going to scream or something, because she took a big breath, and I told her that was the worst thing she could do. I asked her to take off her dress and remove her pantyhose. I couldn't achieve an erection. She said she had never had sex before and was a virgin, and I told her to quit lying. I got on top of her. Somewhere during that time, I achieved ejaculation, but sex wasn't the major thing on my mind. I said, "I'm going to let you go." She said, "I won't tell anybody, just don't hurt me." I said, "All right, but I'm going to have to tie you up." I took her panties and put them in her mouth, and took her pantyhose and tied them across her mouth. I laid her back down on the floor and tried to choke her, but it seemed the more I choked her, the more, her eyes wouldn't close, like she wasn't going to die. So I told her to close her eyes, and she did. And when she did, I knew this choking deal wasn't doing no good, so I took the knife and tilted her head back. When I first stuck it in her throat, it just didn't seem like it was working. She still had her eyes open, looking at me. I told her again to close her eyes, and she did. So I used both hands, and I tried to force it in. Then I took a dust broom, and I held the knife with my left hand and hammered it in with my right hand using the dust broom. I pulled the knife all the way to the left and then all the way to the right, and I knew that would kill her, because that would cut off everything inside of her neck. Recalling his feelings that day, Gage said, "I looked at him and thought, you are a total piece of worthless shit." Gage was still in Atlanta in 1980 when the Bureau decided to change it into a prison for Cuban detainees. As always, Gage was put in charge of the troublemakers. He worked 12 to 16 hours, 7 days a week, recalled Pistol Gage. The Bureau pushed and had pushed him as far as it could. But whenever I started to complain, I stopped myself because the Bureau had been so good for us, providing us with a house and a good salary. I was loyal to it, even though I knew Eddie was at the point to where he was both mentally and psychologically exhausted, and then it happened. Gage was talking to a contentious Cuban when the detainee suddenly flinched. I honestly thought he was taking a swing at me, so I backhanded him and the blow knocked him down, Gage recalled. Gage's boss, a captain, was standing nearby and he slugged and kicked the Cuban while he was on the floor. When the Cuban later complained about brutality, Director Carlson sent Jerry O'Brien to investigate. Before O'Brien filed a written report, he briefed Carlson. Norm looked at me and said, "Fire them both." That was it. O'Brien waited a day and went back to see Carlson. I told him more about the situation, O'Brien recalled, but he didn't change his mind. Norm was totally against brutality. Still, O'Brien waited. Finally, I went in for a third time and just blurted it out. I said, "Norm, that place is wild. The frustration level among staff is high. It demands some compassion." He listened to me for a while and said, "Okay." So we demoted the captain, and Eddie Gage was suspended for 2 weeks and transferred to the penitentiary at Terre Haute, Indiana. It was really a shame because Gage was on the rise. He had been destined to move up the ladder. The Gages felt victimized. "I am convinced the Bureau was really trying to force me out," said Gage. "I think Carlson and the others expected me to quit or crawl into the woodwork and simply lay down." At Terre Haute, Gage earned the highest job performance evaluations possible, but did not receive a single promotion. "I felt very betrayed and very bitter for a long time," said Pistol Gage. "The Bureau had always treated us as family, and then, because of this one mistake, everyone turned against us." 4 years later, Gage was sent to an even less desirable assignment, the prison in Oxford, Wisconsin. On January 29, 1984, the mutilated body of Boyd H. Spikerman, a guard who had worked at the prison less than 6 months, was discovered. Once again, Gage put his investigative skills to work. Gage quickly identified the murderer as Matthew Granger, a convicted killer and braggart who had killed Spikerman because he wanted to gain admittance to the Aryan Brotherhood. Granger had hoped that by killing the guard, just as Silverstein and Fountain had done in Marion less than 3 months earlier, he would be accepted by the AB. Like the dietitian murdered in Atlanta, the guard had been chosen simply because he was convenient. Granger later bragged about the killing to a television reporter. "I killed him about 4 different ways. I stabbed him, cut his eyes out, cut his throat, strangled him, beat him with the fire extinguisher and flashlight, and stuck a ring of keys down his throat." And then Granger looked directly into the camera and said, "This has just begun for me. I'm only 31 years old. I got a lot of bodies to collect." Gage received a special citation from the Bureau for his investigation of the Granger murder. Ironically, it was Carlson who awarded it to him. When Carlson retired in July of 1987, Gage was promoted to the hothouse. A few weeks after he arrived, he found a bullet dangling from a piece of string tied to his mailbox outside his new home. Officers in Oxford called him later that day to tell him an informant had revealed that several inmates had put out a contract on Gage and his family. The bullet was meant as a warning that the inmates knew where he lived. Gage and his family took what precautions they could, but there was little to do but wait. Nothing happened. Sometimes, Gage said, when he thought about the long hours, low pay, danger, the lack of respect that the guards received in most communities, and the daily grind of dealing with society's violent psychotics, he wondered why he stayed on. But those moments never lasted long. "Not everyone can do this kind of work," he said, "but it's always come easy to me and I enjoy it. Quite frankly, I think the traits that you need to be a good officer and the traits you need to be a good convict are very, very similar. I think I would make a good convict. I have the qualities you need: toughness, not being afraid of violence. I can handle that. But there is one big difference that separates us. Convicts are predators. They hurt other people. They take advantage of other people. They really only care about themselves. They don't attack the strong. They prey off the weak and helpless in our society, and they destroy lives. I can be violent, just as violent as any inmate in here, if the situation demands that. I can even kill. I have killed many men. I am not a predator, and that is what separates us from them. We don't cross that line."